A very good afternoon and thank you for keeping it NTV Uganda. My name is Romeo Busiku. Now get this, on Saturday the 20th of June, the world observed World Refugee Day, a special occasion to highlight the plight, the suffering of the refugees in the whole world. Get this, 79.5 million people have been displaced globally. Now here in Uganda, we are talking about 1,423,377 refugees right here in Uganda. Now, highlighting the plight of refugees should never be a one-day affair. That's why NTV took it upon themselves on the 22nd of June to again bring about this conversation to highlight the plight of refugees. In the studio, I'm joined by the Acting Commissioner for Refugees from the Office of the Prime Minister, that is Honorable Simon Gerard Menya. Also in studio, I do have a refugee from DRC. His name is Mr. Robert Akiza. He's also the Executive Director of Young African Refugees for Integral Development. Lastly, I also have the Head of Programs from that is the Refugee Law Project, and it's Miss Devota Nue. She's also a member of the World Refugee Council. Now, before I present to you my guests, remember, from South Sudan and from DRC and Burundi, at least since 2019, we've had 50 South Sudan refugees coming into Uganda. We've also continued to see 200 refugees coming in from Burundi. Even during the lockdown, we got some reports that refugees were still making their way into Uganda. Now, doesn't that actually put the population in Uganda at risk, because these countries are hotspots for the coronavirus? So let me present to you my guests in studio and we get on with this conversation. A very good afternoon and thank you for joining us right here on NTV.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me start with you, Mr. Simon Gerard Menya, the Acting Commissioner for Refugees in the Office of the Prime Minister. Let's start with some simple discussion to get us into this whole conversation. Who is a refugee, in your opinion? What is the definition?
Well, moderator, thank you very much once again to appear on NTV. I bring you greetings and regards from the Department of Refugees, Office of the Prime Minister. My name is Mena Gerard once again, and I'm the Commissioner for Refugees in Uganda. There are two words that are synonymously used in the day-to-day talk. That's a refugee and an asylum seeker.
Yes.
Let me begin with an asylum seeker. An asylum seeker is that person who is running away from his country of origin into Uganda or in any other country on account of persecution, on reasons of race, sex, religion, or any particular social group or political opinion, or is running away from external aggression, occupation, foreign domination, or invent seriously disturbing public order in his country of origin, or factors failing to conform to gender discrimination practices that a person is compelled to leave his or her his country so that he seeks refuge in another country. Now, that person who is running away and is not yet registered in our books, in our record, in our database, and is in the process of being documented, is called an asylum seeker.
I see.
But now a refugee is that person whom I've described, who is running away for different reasons into a foreign country on account of various factors that I've mentioned, but is already registered with us, and he has the documentation and he has been approved by the necessary tribunals in place like REC and RAB, and once that is done, then this person is called a refugee. So in simple terms, that is a person who is running away on account of general disorder or public disorder from his country of origin into a foreign country on account of different different reasons.
Indeed. Now, Mr. Menya, what are the rights of a refugee in Uganda?
Well, there are quite a number of rights, if I can put it that way, and they are enshrined in the 2006 Refugee Act. One of them is that a refugee is entitled to documentation, is entitled to being identified. That is a right. And for that reason, the moment this person is registered in our record, then is issued with ID, and also another document called family attestation, which details where he's coming from, age, nationality, and also his other family members that he has come along with in the country that is hosting him, among other documents. But also, we also give him, it is a right for this person to be given with a conventional travel document. A conventional travel document is that document which is issued to a refugee to enable him to travel outside Uganda,
Yes.
except his country of origin. So it is like a passport. The other right that we normally pass on to, that refugees enjoy all over the country, that they are like, they enjoy the rights of education, health, and any other services that is provided. They have the right to movement within the country. They're not encamped, but they are settled. And we have close to 1,430,000 refugees in this country, and they are at liberty to move within the country wherever they want. Some of them are in Kampala and other major urban areas. Others are in rural areas or in our refugee settlement. So they have that liberty to move around the entire country. They also have recognition of their foreign certificates. Many of them come in Uganda when they have certificates, diplomas, degrees, masters, PhDs, even postdoctoral certificates. And a competent authority normally looks at these in terms of equivalency, and then they are able to enjoy and work in light and in line of what they have shown in terms of their profession. So they have the right to do that. The other issue is that they have the right to engage in commerce, in trade, in agriculture, in industry, or to do any business.
Right.
To do any business. The other issue is that they have the right to practice the profession of what they hold in terms of qualification. That one, which actually I've also mentioned that. But also they have the right to have access to employment opportunities. And they don't buy or pay for work permits. The moment you identify yourself to an employer that you are a refugee, then the employer is supposed to procure for you a worker permit, but not for a refugee to pay for that worker permit. A refugee also has a right to belong to a religion, his children, his family, and any other religion that locals enjoy also is at liberty to enjoy that right. He has a right also to associate with non-political and non-profit associations, even trade unions. The only thing that is not allowed to enjoy is the right to engage in politicking at local or national level. A refugee is not supposed to politic or to enjoy in that right. He has also a right to intellectual property right. He can invent, he can create, he can be a social entrepreneur, he can come up with a drama or a song, and he has full rights to those.
Just like the nationals.
Just like the nationals. He also has the right to travel outside the country, and right. Like I said earlier on, is entitled to have a travel document, an equivalent of a passport. He has a right there are rights for children as well.
All right.
Like those which are enshrined in our Child Act or policies or legislation. Those refugee children also enjoy those rights. That's why they go to school together with our local children. They have there's what we call in law personal status. That is a right that is enjoyed by a refugee. In terms of, he doesn't lose what he came with in terms of status. Yes. If he was married, then we recognize his marriage here. If he had a certificate, that certificate he can make use of it as long as they equate it to the equivalent of what it is.
Good enough, Mr. Simon.
Exactly.
Mega. Let's talk about the welfare of the refugees with Ms. Devota Nue, the head of programs at the Refugee Law Project, and she's also a member of the World Refugee Council. Ms. Devota Nue, let's talk about welfare. What could be done to improve the welfare of refugees right here in Uganda?
So thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, viewers. When it comes to the welfare of the refugees, the Commission has just listed a whole range of rights that refugees enjoy. However, they have limited access to services, so they have challenges with accessing medical assistance. And also, to improve their welfare, they need to have, most of them come with a lot of trauma from their countries where they have fled, so they need a lot of psychosocial support. Another challenge they face is also when they come into Uganda, they may get into trouble with the law, so they may need legal representation. And then also they may need education. As you know, right now we are under lockdown, so some of the rights that the Commissioner has mentioned actually further limited, because when you look at the education of refugees, we don't know actually if they are studying. So much as we have rights guaranteed, we see that the welfare of refugee children and also access to livelihoods. Most of the refugees do day-to-day work. They are daily wage earners. But right now with the lockdown, many refugees are at home and they are not earning anything. So it's actually a challenge.
Let me also bring in Robert Akiza. Robert, we've heard that things have become hard, especially for Ugandans right here, 3 times hard. Now, if things have become 3 times harder for a Ugandan, now get this, what about a refugee? So the numbers indicate that it has become 5 times harder for the refugees. Now, in your opinion, help us understand, what are some of the coping mechanisms these refugees have employed in the interim to cope with this situation?
Thank you so much. I think that's a very interesting question. And of course, as you know, this situation of COVID-19 has not left everyone behind.
Indeed.
You know, it has affected almost everyone. But as we said, when you look at the impact of it to the refugee population, it has been really very high. Madame Devota has just said right now about how refugees, you know, most of them, they live hand to mouth. It means they live on daily basis. If they don't get out in the morning and they cannot get something to eat. And we've seen a lot of things like for us who are right there in the community, we've seen a lot of things happening. We've seen a lot of trauma and the suffering during this period. But the good thing is, and of course, you know, we, like for instance, my organization, which is a refugee-led organization, and we are so because of the policy in Uganda that allow us, you know, to organize ourselves in association and stuff. I've seen, and that's something that actually I would like to emphasize on. We've seen people like the first people who stood up to reach out to the refugees who are suffering in the community were actually the refugees themselves. And my organization and so many other communities there, they organize themselves to make sure, you know, that refugees get something to eat, food, through our network, our friends, our colleagues. So we've been trying to mobilize some funds to buy food so that we can at least make sure that people, even they can get a meal a day. And this has been actually one of the thing that has supported the refugee to reach up to this point. So, and this actually, I think, something that reminds us again that how we need really to invest in the refugee themselves. Because, you know, in such situation, we've seen, for instance, all the implementing organizations have been affected also by lockdown. People are working from home. So if you work from home, how do we make sure that these refugees who are there waiting for our support get something to eat? So I think we need to emphasize on it, and this could be actually the time that people need to rethink about how to make things more ready at the local level. Because, you know, it's very simple for someone like me or the people in the community to do something for their fellow people. But when it comes to this international organization of the bureaucracy that we know, all of us, you know, it's a challenge. The I can give, for instance, an example. Like UNHCR came up with a very interesting idea for the very first time to support refugees in these periods in the urban area. But how long does it take? Did it take to actually for refugees to get this support? This is a discussion that started, I think, just after the president announced the lockdown. But it's only recently here that the first refugees started getting that money transfer you're talking about. Almost 3 months. You can understand this kind of bureaucracy and stuff. I think it's a moment that people think more about localization, because I think it's now, it's sustainable and it can help in this such a situation. Yeah.
Ms. Amenya, let's talk about Burundian refugees for a second. Now, it is not news that many Burundians fled their country because of political persecution, and many of them are right here in Uganda. And they're also part of the 1,423,377 refugees we have here. But things have gotten better within Burundi. Nkurunziza Pierre is no longer in the country. He passed away. Now we have a new president, Evariste Ndayishimiye, and many experts believe peace and normalcy have returned to Burundi. In your opinion, do you believe Burundians are willing to go back home?
Well, that's a tough question indeed, because the current leadership in Burundi is hardly 1 week or so, and it will be difficult for us to establish with surgical precision or pinpoint precision whether the regime, the establishment in Burundi is good enough in terms of security and peace for the 40,000 Burundians to go back home. However, I want also to assure the public that our persons of concern from Burundi are constantly monitoring the situation back home, and themselves also can determine, can easily advise the government whether they are ready to go back home, whether the situation is safe for them to go back home or not. But also, having said that, normally when there are processes that we follow when we want to repatriate our persons of concern to their countries of origin. One, we have to assess the situation in terms of what occasioned their flight into their countries of origin. And until those factors are done away with, or they are reduced, then we may not ask them to go back home. Two, we don't force people to go back home. There is no forced repatriation. It is voluntary. So until and when the situation is normal, then we may not ask people to go back home. But most importantly, we shall continue to consult and also monitor the situation and assess the situation, and also consult the refugees themselves whether the situation is normal or not. And when it is normal, then we shall inform that there will be diplomatic engagement of the government of Burundi by the government of Uganda and UNHCR to ensure that these persons of concern are able to go back home. But also, we need also to, it has a huge financial implication. We are talking of 40,000 people going back home. What are they going to do?
It's not easy fit.
It's not easy. So we need to plan. There's need for the responsible entities at the UN level, the UNHCR, World Food Program, the Burundian government, the government of Uganda, to plan and then to source for resources, both financial and non-financial, to help to return these people to their countries of origin. Because we need to cater for them in terms of food, in terms of welfare, where are they going, and so on and so forth. So it is not a question of switching on or tapping it on that now you go back tomorrow. It requires systematic planning to ensure that they go back in dignity.
Let me also bring in Ms. Devota Nue, the head of programs at the Uganda Refugee Law Project, and she's also a member of the World Refugee Council. Ms. Devota Nue, let's talk about the United Nations and what can be done. Now, in your opinion, particularly as a member of the World Refugee Council, how can international policy at the United Nations be changed to improve the plight of refugees?
Thank you for that question. There are very many policies that need to be changed at the global level, and the options right now for refugees when it comes to durable solutions, there are three. So either a person returns back to their country, voluntary repatriation, just as Mr. Menya was just speaking about, a situation is safe and they can go back home, or they can locally integrate in the country if the laws allow, or the third option is they go for resettlement to a third country.
Right.
Those are the options available. But right now in the World Refugee Council released a report in 2018, January, and we made 52 recommendations, but I'll just touch on 2 that I would see as a policy looking at what's happening right now with the COVID situation, the current situation with, and also the various refugee crises around the world. What we'd want to see is more responsibility sharing from governments, because right now when you see with the border closures, you see that many governments are actually restricting the entry of refugees. If you look at what the Italians are doing or what America is doing. So one thing that would emphasize is responsibility sharing. And then also for the UN would also recommend a more sustainable funding. As Hakiza was saying, very many things happen with the pandemic. It came and caught everyone unawares, and actually right now we are worried about the funding situation in the future. So the recommendation is to come up with a sustainable finance mechanism so that we actually don't forget the assistance of refugees. Yes.
Let me also bring in Mr. Robert Akiza. He is the Executive Director of Young African Refugees for Integral Development. Mr. Akiza, have you noticed an interruption when it comes to services, medical services like HIV prevention, access to sexual and reproductive health services for refugees during this time of COVID-19?
As I said earlier, I think this was actually a very difficult moment for refugees, and especially to access the services available. As you know, during this lockdown, you know, it was practically difficult or impossible for people to move around. And when you talk, for instance, for these people who gets, for instance, these RVs, because they have points, centers where they are supposed to get them. So how can a refugee go and access these drugs if they cannot move? And there was actually a very serious problem when it was, you know, like even to connect with organizations that are supposed to facilitate the movements. And we've seen actually what I said, a lot of problem. But I can't also forget to talk about that so many refugees have got very serious. We've seen their sickness developed in this period, because you know, once you are sick and you don't get the proper treatment, and it keeps on you know, increasing and increasing, and up to when, you know, someone may even lose the life. So I think it has affected a lot, and especially people with chronic diseases, and you know, they couldn't get on time, you know, their medications. I've been moving around. I remember sometimes back, I think the second or third week of the lockdown, because I and my team have been moving to check to our fellow refugees to see how we can support them. And I found a young girl who is a diabetic, and she was crying. She said, you know, look, I cannot get my injections right now.
Insulin shot.
Yeah, insulin shot. Yeah, but she couldn't get them, and it was really very difficult. I could imagine all the number of people that we have in the communities, refugee communities, having this problem, how the challenge they face to access these services. I can say again that it has been a very difficult moment, and it has affected a lot the refugees.
It's been a tough one, Mr. Robert Akiza, but then how can government ensure continuity of these services? I'm going to throw that question to you, and also Ms. Amenya.
I think, and again, as I said, this is a moment again that even the government and everyone, we need to rethink again how we deal this such situation. And I think it's very right to start at the policies. And as we usually say, and when you look at the policies in Uganda, we don't have any problem with the policies in Uganda. Uganda has a very wonderful and good policies. Yes. But the very big challenge and the problem we are having, it's the implementation of this policy. And also the time I think the governments take to monitor the implementation of this policy. Like the big question that everyone can ask himself, how many people know about this policy in the country? You're going to see that most of the time these policies are only known at the top level there, in the office of Prime Minister. But when you go at the local level, at the division level, how many people know about it? And
that's a great question that we could throw to Mr. Menya. It seems like these policies are rife within the office of the Prime Minister, but when you go to the lower levels, people do not know about these policies, and implementation is too slow.
No, I want to deviate from my brother Robert.
Go ahead and explain.
That the policy, the refugee policy in Uganda is only known at high levels and within the corridors of the office of the Prime Minister. I think it is not correct. This policy is globally known to begin with, that Uganda has the best refugee policy in the whole world. Even our colleagues, our brothers, and the host communities also know. Why? Because you could simply feel it yourself as a refugee in Uganda. We don't even need to explain to you or the community. For instance, refugees are at liberty to move around. No one touches them. Now, do we need to go and put that and create awareness to TV, radio, and even the print media? Because you are enjoying it, you are feeling it. That, yes, I'm here. Actually, this is your second home. To me, actually, it is even your first home. You go to the same schools like we do. We have about 50 universities in this country, and many of these refugees are there pursuing different academic programs. We have our children, refugee children, sharing the same schools, the same classrooms, the same learning and instructional materials, the same teachers, the same everything. Refugees go and pick firewood from the same forest that Ugandans go and pick. So what more do you need us to tell the refugees that this is a bad policy or a good policy?
Maybe they do not know that they can do what you're saying.
No, they know
Yes.
it. They know it. Otherwise,
They
they would have been probably,
Yes.
chased and then thrown away from this country. But we don't. We know these are our brothers and sisters.
And the good thing is, Amenya, you also hinted on the fact that there are also so many universities that they could join and expound on their future targets right there. And we are going to take a very brief break. We are still talking about the issue and the plight of refugees. Everyone matters, and every action does count in this case. Let's take a break. We'll be right back with a conversation that is going to stretch into the educational aspect. How are refugees being kept busy at this time when schools are closed due to COVID-19? We'll be right back. Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us right here on NTV. My name is Romeo Busiku, and we're still discussing the plight of refugees all over the world. Like I hinted before we started off the interview, I did say that 79.5 million refugees or people have been displaced from their homelands. Now, that is not a small figure. In Uganda here, we are talking about 1,423,377 people. Yes. Now, remember, everyone can make a difference, and every action does count. Well, let me reintroduce my guests. I do have Mr. Robert Akiza. He is the Executive Director of Young African Refugees for Integral Development. I also do have Ms. Devota Nue. She is the head of programs working with Uganda Refugee Law Project, and she's also a member of the World Refugee Council. And lastly, from the Office of the Prime Minister, I do have the Acting Commissioner for Refugees, that is Honorable Gerard Simon Menya. Mr. Menya, let's talk about the issue of education. What are you doing to ensure that refugee children are kept busy now that schools are closed?
I just want to say that it is now 3 months ago since these schools were closed in all our refugee settlements and all over the country.
Yes.
And the impact and the effect not only affect refugee children, but also all school-going children within the country. And therefore, what is happening is that first of all, I want to thank the New Vision establishment for weekly publications, for reading and instructional materials in the print media, in the Book a Day, in New Vision papers and so on. And all these materials don't only benefit
and
refugee
the
children.
Daily Monitor has also been doing
also
that,
the
Mr.
Monitor,
Menya.
yes,
We cannot talk about the other side and not talk about Daily Monitor, Mr. Menya. It's not fair.
And also the Monitor. And all these publications and the printing materials go to our children, not only to our local children, but also refugee children. And I want to thank them on behalf of the department and also the Prime Minister. I want to thank them very, very sincerely.
Right.
But having said that, our children, first of the school playgrounds are free. They were not closed, unless otherwise. But community schools, children go and enjoy those facilities. They can go and play football. I've seen quite a number of them when I'm on my missions across the country. Children go and enjoy those playgrounds, and they also children there we have of the 264 implementing and operating partners that we have in the country in the refugee response, 38 of them are involved in providing educational services, and they are still very active. I want to single out 2 or 3. We have UNICEF, we have Window Trust International, we have the Norwegian Refugee Council, we have quite a number of them. Christian Children's Fund, we have they rebranded themselves that they call Child Fund International. We have Save the Children. They are still very active as far as providing educational services these children is concerned, and they continue to provide educational and learning materials, learning and instructional materials to our children, and some of them access them alongside with our local children. They do get them. However, having said that, let us not forget that these children are in a lockdown. The lockdown still affects them. The lockdown still impacts them. How? Because they're supposed to be indoor, lest they are affected, lest they get into contact with people who are sick, and then they're affected. So much as they are at liberty to go and access some of these facilities and play around or read at home, I want to encourage our parents, including our refugee parents, to ensure that these children are kept at home so that they don't get into contact with this deadly pandemic which is ravaging the entire world.
All right, Mr. Menya. Let me also bring in Devota Nue, the head of programs at Uganda Refugee Law Project, and she's also a member of the World Refugee Council. Mr. Devota Nue, let's talk about issues to do with taking care of refugee needs. Who is taking care of refugee needs like food, healthcare during the COVID-19 pandemic, especially considering the fact that they are living near the borders, which are also hotspots for transmission?
Thank you for that question. So the refugee management in Uganda is the lead organization, government organization is Office of the Prime Minister. So in partnership with UNHCR and other civil society organizations and NGOs like Refugee Law Project, we are providing life-saving services. So in the refugee settlements, food is provided by WFP. But unfortunately, the food ration was actually cut just as the lockdown was starting in March. The food ration was reduced by 30%, so they're now receiving 70% of what they were receiving.
Did that make matters worse?
Yes, it made matters worse. And as Robert spoke earlier and said, UNHCR had come up with emergency assistance to assist refugees here in the urban, but then it came 3 months later, a little too late. But nonetheless, organizations have been working on the ground. Refugee Law Project has also been providing medical care. We have a project where we work with war-related harms. So many refugees have fled with a lot of injuries from conflict, and we are doing a lot of work as we are funded by the Foreign Affairs Ministry of the Dutch government, and they provided a lot of support for us to provide medical care. So this has even continued during the lockdown. We still take refugees to hospital, but as you know, it has been difficult with getting permission from the RDC, and also right now, much as the lockdown has been lifted within like Kampala, Wakiso and other districts in the central, but still within the refugee hosting areas, the border districts, there is limited movement. So it's actually very difficult to provide assistance. But many organizations are there, like WFP, International Rescue Committee. There are very many organizations, NGOs that are providing assistance.
Okay, let me also bring in Mr. Robert Hakiza. Let's talk about the issue of stigmatization. There is a largely negative stigma surrounding refugees, you must believe, and it's owed to some Ugandans being ignorant about this issue of refugees. In your own opinion, how would you suggest that people should combat the stigma that is shown towards refugees or the hostility?
I really don't want to repeat myself, but of course, for me, in my own opinion, when you talk about stigma, discrimination, and so, I don't want to look at it at the low level. I think I look at it more at the institutional level.
Wait, there is stigmatization at the institutional level?
When, let me give an example, for instance.
Yes.
When a refugee go and want to open a bank account, what happens?
I hear you.
So, and that is just an example. And this take me back again, what I've been talking about, the implementation of the policies. You're going to see that people don't know. People we find in those banks and other institutions, they don't know about these wonderful policies of Uganda,
right.
And which they are supposed to implement. I think there is a lot that need to be done so that we make sure that this wonderful policy is implemented at all levels. I think that will make things very, very good.
But besides the policies at the institutional level by Ms. Amenya and the other officials, in your opinion as Robert Akize, yes, how would you suggest that people combat the hostility that is shown towards refugees? Let's focus on the lower level people.
I think we need to go back and at the local level and need to bring this issue of refugees at the local level, as I said.
Right.
Right now, when you go at the local level and when you talk about the government officials in the local level, we're going to see, for instance, that only the LC ones, because they live where refugees are, they may have get information about refugees. But when you go there at LC2 and also at the division level, there is not much that more information that people know at that level. I remember in 2017, again, I like to speak with example. There was a workshop here in Uganda whereby KCCA was invited to come and talk about what KCCA is doing for refugees living in urban area. And I remember very well, that time Madame Musisi was not available, but he was represented by another Innocent. And he came, and the time that we wanted him to present, he came and started showing blank slides. And I said, the first one, I wanted to talk about the refugee, what KCCA is doing for refugees. The second one, the people say, oh, but those are blank slides. And he was very honest. He said, I wanted just to say that we are doing nothing, and I'm here to learn. And that was wonderful. And from that time up to now, we've seen him and the KCCA getting more involved in the issues of refugees at the division, at this level. And I think much is still need to be done. And that's just an example, and I can give many of them.
Mr. Amenya, I'm sure you're itching to actually submit. Stigmatization at the institutional level. What do you make of that?
Stigmatization
at the institutional level.
Nepotism, I don't know even. But anyway, what I can quickly say is that like any other system, it has shortfalls, it has gaps. We may not have done enough work in terms of creating awareness and sensitizing the public about refugees in this country. But like I said earlier on, the refugee policy speaks for itself within and also without this country. Having said that, we need to share widely our policies, our regulations, our legislations with the relevant entities, ministries, MDAs. We need also probably to mainstream and integrate refugee response into our educational program, so that the children at that age, in P1, P2, P3, up to university, they may know what refugee is all about and how we can treat them and how we can coexist with them. We need probably, but the other issue is that we have done a lot in terms of ensuring that we recognize our brothers and sisters as our brothers, and we continue informing the public these are our sisters, because the colonialists really made it in such a way that they split some of these tribes into two. One tribe is in Uganda, another is in Kenya, and yet there was a time when the vice president of Kenya was a brother to a minister in this country. So that is the, from that point of view that we think refugees are not aliens really per se, but really they are brothers and sisters, and we are doing all that it takes as a government, as institutions, to ensure that we give them all the support they need to live in.
All right, Mr. Menya, let's talk about food shortage a little bit. Now, food shortage, Mr. Menya, is the highest source of distress for refugees during this time of COVID-19. What plans does government have to alleviate this problem?
First of all, upon receipt of these people from their countries of flight into Uganda, we give them land so that they are able to fend for themselves. That's point number one. Every refugee in this country has a piece of land where he or she is settled with their family. It could be small, but to me, that's the beginning. Two, World Food Program continues to provide food to 1.3 million of the 1.4 million refugees in this country every month. And so they are able to hinge on that as they plan for themselves to get more and more food to, you know, to complement and supplement what World Food Program gives them. But also we have, as a government, we have sourced for resources. We have gone for grants, we have gone for loans to provide to our refugees, to provide services which are vital, that can enable them, that can stimulate them to work hard. I want to give an example of having roads constructed. I know you are going to say, how is the road connected to food provision? But it is one way of ensuring that there is massive production, so that there is transportation of the markets and so on and so forth. And we have also encouraged development organizations to join the refugee response.
Right.
Some of them are not only providing food and education, education and health, but also they engage in supplementing food. This morning, I received two entities, two development partners, who have thousands and thousands of food they want to go and distribute to our persons of concern in the West Nile. And those normally come every week. We have posho, we have beanies, and this has been on account of, you know, an appeal to the public that please, if you have food, we have so many people who are in need. But most importantly also, we provide food, fortified food. I want to qualify that. Fortified food to lactating mothers, fortified food to children, to children, fortified food to pregnant women, fortified food to the elderly, and even sometimes to those persons of concern who are suffering from different impairments, ranging from sight to hearing, mental, spastic, to mention but a few. So we are there.
All right, let's leave it at that, and let me bring in Ms. Nue Devota. Now, there are reports that marriages are crumbling. That is not news. And also domestic violence is on the rise. That's also not news. So what are organizations like Refugee Law Project doing to attend to these problems, or attending to the safety of refugees during this prolonged lockdown?
Thank you. So during the lockdown, there has been increased cases of domestic violence. So Refugee Law Project has been doing a lot. We have refugees, or our clients are encouraged to ring our lawyers and counselors. So we provide electronic services because we've been impeded by movement, but still we have lawyers and counselors who are available. Then also, in addition, there is a toll-free line that is run by UNHCR where refugees can report their cases when it comes to domestic violence. So, and also there are a lot of awareness messages and radio support messages that we have put out, encouraging refugees or people who are undergoing domestic violence. But as you know, it is difficult because with domestic violence you have to investigate and you have to make timely intervention. And right now, with restrictions on transport, it has not been easy.
Mr. Menya, how can this problem of South Sudan refugees making their way all the way from Sudan to Uganda be properly managed to track these people, because they're coming from hotspots of COVID-19?
Well, to begin with, the presidential guideline or directive was very clear that all borders must be closed. So to me, borders are closed.
But people are still streaking in.
Yes, it is true. People
so how best are you tracking them?
We have activated our refugee welfare councils, the equivalent of our LC systems. And they are very vigilant. And I want to assure you that as I talk right now, we have over 440 persons of concern in quarantine centers across the country, and 42 of them are already sick, and they are undergoing medication, and all these fellows have been identified, singled out, and then isolated and quarantined on account of the swiftness and support provided by the Refugee Welfare Council. So they continue identifying aliens. I want to qualify that aliens in their communities. Even when they are refugees and they have gone back home, when they come back, they report them to police. They report them to district task forces, who go and weed them out and isolate them and put them somewhere for 14 days before they are passed on to district task forces. And these task forces, sometimes upon receipt of these fellows, they're supposed to return them back home to their countries of origin, where they have come. So we have a very active welfare council system in all our refugee settlements, and they are doing a very good job. But I want also to appeal to the security to ensure that they probably, we have some of these districts have very longer borders, which are porous, like Oyumbe. It has a stretch of about 100 kilometers with 60 porous borders.
I'm afraid I'll have to cut you short, Ms. Amenya. We do have a caller. A caller, yes, you're live on NTV. What's your submission?
Hello?
Yes, good afternoon. What's your submission?
Oh, sorry, I was trying to call accounts.
All right, let's get back to the conversation. Ms. Devota Noe, let's talk about some of the interventions that can be made for communities living around those refugee settlements. We've had stories where communities are saying the refugees are encroaching on our land and so forth. So how best can we come up with the interventions to avoid that stigma coming in from the refugees towards the communities and vice versa?
So in the settlements, as the Commissioner mentioned, refugees are allocated land. And to prevent that stigma, it comes from, again, the Refugee Welfare Councils and the LCs, for them to sit down and actually find solutions to the land conflicts, because the land that is allocated to refugees is actually little. So you find them encroaching on national land, and even leasing land from nationals. So what we encourage, and most of the legal cases that we receive involve conflicts, but we do a lot of mediation with our lawyers, and we try to come up with a solution so that they reach a decision that doesn't involve conflict.
And of course, Ms. Noe Devota, we also have information by the UNHCR that you published indicating that 1 in every 100 people are now a forced migrant. Are we not paying attention to this problem?
We and the problem is actually rising, and what we need to look at to respond to is actually the root causes.
But do you think we are paying enough attention to this problem?
We are not paying enough attention.
Go ahead.
So if you look at, that is why the theme for this year's World Refugee Day is every action
Everyone
matters, and everyone can make a difference. So even your neighbor, if you ask any Ugandan if they know if they are refugees or if they have neighbors as refugees, they don't know. So we actually have to make sure that we first of all pass awareness and let people know that they are refugees, and also for the refugees who are in Uganda to actually give them services and they have a better stay in the country.
Now we are wrapping up, Mr. Menya, Noe, and Robert. We are wrapping up. Let me start with you. Final remarks from you, Robert. What can be done to improve the welfare of refugees from the point of government? You're directing Mr. Menya right now. What can it do for you?
I think